Minister to her place, and can I ask the Deputy First Minister what engagements she has planned for the rest of the day?
Deputy First Minister.
Today the First Minister is travelling back from a very successful trade mission to the United States, and I will be having meetings to take forward the Government's programme for Scotland.
Joanne Lamont.
Yes, it's a pity, of course, that the First Minister cannot be here today, but I am glad to see that at last he has been able to make a trip to the pictures without it ending in farce. Although those truths would give Jack McConnell a run for his money in the fashion stakes. And of course I do say that as something of a fashion icon myself. Now, I know this is a word that the Deputy First Minister can't use, but how does she explain the fall in support for independence?
Deputy First Minister.
Can I reassure Joanne Lamont to start with that I think Jack McConnell is quite safe in his hold on the title of Champion of Silly Outfits, so she needn't worry on that score. Can I also say to Joanne Lamont that I am very confident that the people of Scotland, when they see the proposition that this government will put forward for an independent Scotland, will vote yes for an independent Scotland. And let me tell her, I'm very happy today, and indeed on any day, to talk about independence, to talk about the power independence will give us to prevent any more illegal wars, the power it will give us to rid Scotland of Trident, and the power independence will give us to protect the vulnerable from Tory welfare reforms. Now, Joanne Lamont doesn't want to talk about any of these things because she prefers to leave all of these powers in the hands of her new friends in the Tory party, because she prefers Tory government to self-government.
Ms Lamont.
Well, the First Minister is obviously not here, but his spirit lives on in that response from the Deputy First Minister, who simply didn't answer the question that support for independence is falling. Is it not the fact that independence is becoming more and more unpopular because of airy and meaningless assertions from the likes of the Deputy First Minister, such as Scotland will have a seat on the Monetary Policy Committee of the Central Bank of a foreign country?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, Joanne Lamont mentions the Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of England. I have to say she's becoming a bit like a broken record on this issue. But let me say, the position of the Scottish Government is a perfectly reasonable position, and Joanne Lamont doesn't have to take my word for it, because that's also the opinion of the former member of the Monetary Policy Committee, David Blanchflower, when he said it's not unreasonable for Scotland to have a seat on the Monetary Policy Committee. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb here, but I suspect David Blanchflower knows a bit more about these things than Joanne Lamont. And can I say, on the issue of unpopularity, there will be nothing more unpopular in Scotland in these coming months and years than the new coalition between Labour and the Conservatives, the coalition to hold Scotland back.
Joanne Lamont.
The problem for the Deputy First Minister, she didn't go on television and say David Blanchflower thinks it might be a good idea. What she said was it would happen, and she repeated it in here without even asking anybody. That is what I mean by meaningless assertion in a very serious debate. Now, I felt for the Deputy First Minister. Indeed. I felt for the Deputy First Minister when she had to defend her boss's love-in with Rupert Murdoch. But her defence of his banking plans, are even more risible. You can imagine Wallace's address to his troops at Stirling Bridge if Nicola Sturgeon had written it. Don't worry, boys. If we win, we'll still keep Edward as king. We'll send him homeward with a seat on a Monetary Policy Committee. Now, presuming...
Order. We can't hear the member.
Presuming the Scottish Government is doing anything to prepare for independence, there's that naughty word again, maybe we should say it the I word, can the Deputy First Minister tell me how the discussions are going with the European Union about, shall we say, an independently minded Scotland being a member?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, independent Scotland will be a member of the European Union, and if Joanne Lamont is arguing anything other than she really is in an utterly absurd position. Now, it's interesting that her members laugh because her propositions are certainly something of a joke. I said the MPC position was reasonable. David Blanchflower says it's reasonable. But do you know something? The real question for Joanne Lamont is this. When Scotland votes for independence, is Joanne Lamont really saying that she would be arguing against an independent Scotland having that kind of representation on the Monetary Policy Committee? Because if she is, then again she is arguing an absurd proposition, but then we shouldn't expect anything more from a party that's so happy to link arms with the deeply unpopular Conservative Party.
Joanne Lamont.
Of course, the reality is that again in the European Union, the Deputy First Minister simply asserts something, doesn't ask anybody, doesn't check her facts, just simple assertion. She says it would be absurd to suggest that an independent Scotland wouldn't be in the Monetary Policy Committee. I have never in 40 years heard that argument made by anybody in the SNP until this year, because there is another option, which they will not talk about, that Jim Sellers talks about, which is, of course, an independent currency of your own. Of course, this is Monty Python's Life of Nicola. What's being British ever done for us, apart from the pound, the monarchy, the Bank of England, financial regulation, the Union Jack? The only dead parrot, as the First Minister would have it, is the sketch is independence. The reality is that the SNP, under its current leadership, on Nicola Sturgeon's watch, isn't even prepared to make the case, because she knows the Scottish people won't buy it. Compromise in the monarchy, compromise in the currency, compromise in the second question. We will still be British, we're not nationalists. And the final humiliation. The SNP are not even allowed to say the word that they have campaigned for their whole political life. Is there anything Nicola Sturgeon won't sell out on?
Deputy First Minister. Order.
Can I remind Joanne Lamont that Monty Python actually worked quite well for the SNP in the election last year? We won an overall majority on the back of that particular broadcast. But let me just... She was kind of all over the place there, but I will try to take her points one by one. On European Union membership, let me just refer her to the words of the late and greatly respected Robin Cook. It's in the nature of the European Union. It welcomes all comers, and Scotland would be a member. It was Robin Cook wrong as well. On some of the other things, it might have escaped Joanne Lamont's notice. The SNP has been in favour of retaining the Queen since 1934. She says she didn't hear about our position on sterling until this year. That's been our position since 2005. Perhaps you should pay greater attention. And let me tell Joanne Lamont. Let me tell Joanne Lamont what the benefits of independence are. They mean no more Labour illegal wars. They mean no more weapons of mass destruction. They mean an ability to tackle the poverty that Labour so abysmally failed to tackle. And they mean an ability to protect people in Scotland from the policies of a right-wing Tory government. Joanne Lamont prefers to leave all of those powers in the hands of a Tory government, and that's what she's going to find difficult to explain to the Scottish people.
Question number 2, Ruth Davidson.
If the Deputy First Minister has been in favour of keeping the Queen since 1934, they possibly mean 7:34 last night rather than 1934 when she wasn't on the throne. But I would like to ask the Deputy First Minister when she will next meet the Secretary of State for Scotland.
Deputy First Minister.
Dear, oh dear, oh dear. Anyway, I have no plans to meet with the Secretary of State for Scotland in the near future.
Ruth Davidson.
The Deputy First Minister has said that she has sympathy over doctors striking today, and she understands their frustration and anger at pension changes that they say are unfair. So, can the Deputy First Minister explain to the Chamber what precisely she finds so unfair about an annual pension of £68,000?
Well, this is a serious issue, so I'm going to treat it extremely seriously. I deeply regret the action that has been taken today, although it is not a strike by doctors because they are continuing to cover all emergency and urgent care as normal. It is the case that those participating in the action are not covering non-emergency care. It is therefore unavoidable and unfortunate that many patients will be affected. I deeply regret that action. I note from the BMA material that they say the action is being taken to force the UK Government back to the negotiating table. I should point out that the Scottish Government has never left the negotiating table, and therefore I consider the action not just unfortunate but unnecessary as well. But I do also regret that this action today is taking place over an issue on which this Parliament has limited room for manoeuvre. However, we remain willing to work in partnership with NHS trade unions to find a way forward on the pensions issue within the severe constraints imposed on us, and I would urge the BMA to continue to be a part of that.
Ruth Davidson.
In that response, I didn't hear anything from the Deputy First Minister about why £68,000 is an unfair pension income. I didn't hear anything on whether she'd increase that at the expense of lower-paid public sector workers. Just more SNP grandstanding that they would do something different, just don't ask us what. And in terms of sitting around the negotiating table, the Deputy First Minister knows fine well that the Department of Health had 23 meetings on pensions with the BME, including 5 between the Secretary of State and the head of the BME. But can I ask the Deputy First Minister, given that her responsibility and the responsibility of her government is to stand up for patients affected today, for the taxpayers who finance three-quarters of the multi-billion-pound pension bill, how many appointments...
Mr MacDonald, please stop it.
Can I ask the Deputy First Minister, how many appointments have been cancelled today in Scotland because of this industrial action? How many operations have had to be postponed? How many patients have been denied treatment by their NHS because taxpayers' contributions of £50,000 a year to a £68,000 pension is not deemed to be enough?
Deputy First Minister.
Can I point out to Ruth Davidson, because I appreciate she may not be aware of this, the NHS pension scheme was reformed in 2008. I think everybody in Scotland, doctors, other public sector workers, certainly this government understands and appreciates the importance of the long-term sustainability of pension schemes. But there are many in Scotland, low-paid workers included, who think that the current UK reforms are more about a cash grab for deficit reduction than they are about the long-term sustainability of pensions. Now, I have already outlined the position in terms of the Scottish Government's position, and we will continue in negotiations, albeit within the limits of severe constraints, to see if we can find a better way forward. And I actually think that's in the interest of patients as well as in the interest of those who work within our National Health Service. In terms of the impact of today's industrial action, Ruth Davidson and other members will appreciate that I have been monitoring this very carefully and very closely, and will continue to do so through the course of today. I am advised that approximately 3,200 outpatient appointments and around 450 inpatient and day cases have been cancelled. I should say patients have been advised, and all appointments will be rescheduled as soon as possible. I also understand that approximately 60% of GP practices are affected to some extent. So I will continue to monitor the situation as the day progresses. I think the interests of patients and the interests of patient safety and continuity of care are absolutely paramount, and that is why the Scottish Government will continue to work with doctors and with health boards through the course of today to ensure that any impact on patients is minimised.
Jenny Mara.
Can
Can I ask the Deputy First Minister why the Dalai Lama has not been afforded a proper welcome by the Scottish Government or the SNP-led Dundee City Council, who wanted the city's logo removed from the visit programme after a visit from the Chinese consul, and won't even put up the Deputy Lord Provost of the city to welcome the Tibetan leader? What message does this send about the SNP's willingness to address human rights abuse in China?
Deputy First Minister.
Firstly, the Scottish Government has, on many occasions, and will continue to raise the important issue of human rights in meetings and in speeches with the Chinese Government. In terms of Jenny Marr's question about Dundee City Council, I'm sure she appreciates that arrangements made by Dundee City Council are entirely a matter for Dundee City Council. There has been no discussion or contact whatsoever between the Scottish Government and Dundee City Council about the visit of the Dalai Lama. More generally, can I say in all sincerity to members across this chamber that I think it is unfortunate if anyone in any party seeks to politicise the visit of the Dalai Lama to Scotland. And the reason for that is because it is not a political or a state visit. The Dalai Lama is making a pastoral visit to Scotland. He is being very properly recognised and respected by this Parliament in the non-political, as I understand it, meeting to be hosted by the presiding officer in Queensberry House tomorrow. So I hope all members will recognise that and reflect that accordingly in the tone they take around the visit.
Question number 2, Christina McKelvey.
Much, Presiding Officer. Phillips Lighting in Hamilton in my constituency this week announced potential job losses of 40 jobs. Phillips is a 65-year presence in Hamilton, and this announcement comes as a blow to the local economy, as well as the obvious shock for the workers concerned. Can I ask the Deputy First Minister what support the Scottish Government can offer to provide both the workers who are directly affected by the redundancy and to Phillips itself in order to try and ensure that their workforce in Hamilton is protected?
Deputy First Minister.
I absolutely share, as I'm sure all members will, the concern expressed by Christina McKelvey about developments in respect to Phillips Lighting and the impact this will have on the employees affected, their families and indeed the general area. I understand, as Christina McKelvey has said, there are around 320 staff in the Hamilton site and approximately 40 employees across production and support functions are likely to be affected. It is hoped that this number will be achieved through voluntary redundancies. I can confirm that our local PACE team has already contacted Phillips to offer PACE support, and PACE presentations to staff have been arranged for the 8th of August with the offer of follow-up workshops and one-to-one career management interviews. I hope this reassures the member that we will do everything possible to provide support to Phillips employees who may be affected by redundancy to minimise the time that they are out of work.
Question number 3, Willie Rennie.
To ask the Deputy First Minister what issues will be discussed at the next meeting of the Cabinet.
Deputy First Minister.
At the next meeting of the Cabinet will discuss issues of importance to the people of Scotland.
Willie Rennie.
In response to Jenny Marra, the Deputy First Minister talked about human rights in China. Let's just remind ourselves about the position of human rights in China, a country where 500,000 people are detained without trial, where women are forced to have abortions on the orders of the government, where political oppression is at its most severe in Tibet. The Deputy First Minister has a chance to be very clear about what she thinks today. Will she, on behalf of the Scottish Government, condemn the human rights record of the Chinese Government?
Deputy First Minister.
I condemn human rights abuses everywhere that they happen, and I am absolutely unequivocal about that. Can I say, again, in all sincerity to Willie Rennie, I think every single member of this chamber has a deep commitment to human rights across the globe, and I think it's a mistake on the part of any member in this chamber to seek to divide it on the important issue of human rights. So I hope that is a statement that is unequivocal enough for Willie Rennie.
Willie Rennie.
Well, I'm pleased to hear that she is condemning the human rights record of the Chinese Government. I have to say it's a welcome change. It's a welcome change from the ambiguous attitude of the First Minister. Can the Deputy First Minister take practical steps now? Practical steps. We know the Consul-General has put pressure on Scottish councils and the First Minister. Dundee has pulled back from the Dalai Lama's visit, and the First Minister is refusing to meet him. To put this right, she can do two things. Encourage her colleagues on Dundee City Council to provide a high-level speaker to deputise for the Lord Provost. She can also get the First Minister or any other minister at any point over the next 3 days to meet the Dalai Lama. If the Deputy First Minister takes these steps today, she will send an absolutely loud and clear message to the Chinese government that she does condemn their human rights record. Will she make those changes happen?
Deputy First Minister.
Look, I think Willie Rennie is making a serious mistake in trying to divide this chamber on these issues. I mean, firstly, in relation to Dundee City Council, I do not speak for Dundee City Council, but I think he is wrong in how he describes the position of the Council. The Lord Provost is attending the reception for the Dalai Lama after he has attended a funeral. Now, I really hope Willie Rennie is not seeking to make an issue of that. In terms of the position of the visit overall, as I said in response to Jenny Mara, the Dalai Lama is making a pastoral visit to Scotland. He is being properly recognised by this Parliament in a reception hosted by the presiding officer, which, as far as I understand it, no party political representative will attend. It's also my understanding, although Willie Rennie may know differently, that no UK Government minister will meet the Dalai Lama while he is in Scotland. That, of course, would include Michael Moore and Danny Alexander. So I hope Willie Rennie would do two things. I hope he will accept the deep commitment of everyone in this chamber to human rights across the world. And secondly, I hope he will accept that this is a pastoral visit by the Dalai Lama and it would be wrong of anybody to seek to politicise it.
Question number 4, James Donnan.
To ask the Deputy First Minister what support the Scottish Government gives to carers.
Deputy First Minister.
During Carers Week and indeed all year round, I acknowledge and applaud the tremendous work of Scotland's unpaid carers and young carers who care for their families, friends and neighbours. Yesterday, the Minister for Public Health launched in this Parliament Support in Mind Scotland Carers Information Pack for carers of people with mental illness. With our funding, local authorities exceeded the target of delivering an extra 10,000 respite weeks by 2011 to achieve an extra 10,600 weeks. The Scottish Government is providing unprecedented levels of support to carers and young carers, and this includes, through our manifesto commitment, at least 20% of the Change Fund for older people, which is nearly £50 million over 3 years, which will support carers of older people to continue to care.
James Donnan.
I thank the Deputy First Minister for that answer. I know that she recognises the great work being done in both my constituency and hers by organisations such as South East Carers. And it was whilst working with carers and carers groups that I became aware that many of the voluntary organisations that support carers and those requiring care in Glasgow face extra difficulty due to the unique tendering process put in place by Glasgow City Council. Given these challenges that these organisations face, would the Deputy First Minister consider using the Change Fund to further support the work of these important voluntary organisations?
Deputy First Minister.
I'm very familiar with the good work of the Glasgow South East Carer Centre. As James Donnan rightly says, they operate in his constituency and indeed they have a very heavy presence in my own constituency. I also know about the concerns expressed around the tendering processes. We have made abundantly clear, as I indicated in my original answer, that at least 20% of the Change Fund for older people should be used to support carers to continue to care, and that applies as much in Glasgow as it does in any other partnership area. The Change Plan submitted by Glasgow City Partnership states that £2,600,000 approximately will be spent in supporting carers either directly or indirectly, and that represents over 20% of its Change Fund application. However, we want evidence of support and will therefore be asking all partnerships to submit a progress report in September to review in particular progress with development on support to carers and work on joint commissioning.
Duncan McNeill.
Presiding Officer, this week we all recognise the contribution that Scotland's 650,000 carers play, and I am confident that the Cabinet Secretary will be as concerned as I am and others are about the survey this week of over 3,000 of those carers, who 80% of them who believe that caring role has an impact on their health. We know that work, as she has just described, takes place and support is in place for many, but obviously there are many carers missing out. What can we do to ensure action, to ensure that all carers receive the help that they need?
Deputy First Minister.
I appreciate Duncan McNeill's question, and I think he's absolutely right. If I can be frank about this, as I often am directly to carers, firstly, we owe carers an unbelievable debt of gratitude, but we don't just owe them thanks, we do owe them action to support them. Secondly, I'm not sure that no matter how much we do, we will ever properly repay carers for the extraordinary contribution that they make, but we have an obligation to do everything we can. I was very struck by the survey he refers to because it reflects evidence and information that I have directly from carers that often they care at the expense of their own health. And that's why so much of the action we have taken, and will continue to take, because this is work in progress, it does focus on providing respite care, short break provision, and of course encouraging GPs and other health professionals to be conscious of the health needs of people who have caring responsibilities. So I'm not standing here saying the government has got this all right and there is no more that we can do, but we are going in the right direction, and we will continue to work with carers organisations to make sure that we are fulfilling our obligation to them. But let me end, I'm sure on behalf of everybody in the chamber, with a very heartfelt thank you to for the contribution that carers make.
Question number 5, Richard Simpson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Deputy First Minister what impact the industrial action by doctors could have on operations, diagnostic tests and outpatient appointments.
Deputy First Minister.
As members are aware, today's industrial action is the first by doctors in almost 40 years. It's important to emphasise that doctors are not on strike. They are continuing to cover all emergency and urgent care. However, non-urgent care is being affected. As I said earlier on, in terms of hospital care, boards have assessed the impact on operations in clinics and taken steps to inform patients of cancellations. I am advised, as I said to Ruth Davidson, that approximately 3,200 outpatient appointments and around 450 inpatient and day cases have been cancelled, and all appointments will be rescheduled as soon as possible. I also understand that approximately 60% of GP practices are affected by the industrial action to some extent.
Richard Simpson.
Can I thank the Deputy First Minister for that answer? Could I also advise the Chamber of my membership of the British Medical Association in respect of this question? I think everybody in the Chamber regrets this action for the effect that it will have on patients. For whatever the rights and wrongs of the issue of pensions, I think the public would be more sympathetic if doctors confined strike action to defending the NHS and patients. However, the BMA did give 3 weeks' notice of this strike rather than the statutory 1 week, in order to allow patients to be informed in good time of the fact that their appointments would be cancelled, their operations would be cancelled, their diagnostic tests would be cancelled. So what action did the government take? Was a Chief Executive's letter issued to health boards? And what actual monitoring has the government undertaken to ensure that patients have been timely informed of this disruption to their lives? And what further action will the government take to ensure that those patients who are being disrupted today get their appointments back as quickly as possible?
Deputy First Minister.
Can I firstly reiterate what I said earlier on? I deeply regret that this action is taking place today. I don't believe it's in the interests of patients or the NHS, or indeed ultimately in the interests of doctors or those who work within our National Health Service. Scotland's health boards have been planning to deal with the impact of today's industrial action since it became clear that the industrial action was going to happen. I have been receiving regular updates on the preparedness for the industrial action, and indeed, as Richard Simpson may be aware, NHS Scotland employers and the BMA Scotland agreed and issued joint principles for dealing with the industrial action on the 21st of June. Health boards have taken all steps as quickly as they have been able to advise patients where their appointments are affected or cancelled. Richard Simpson is right to say that the industrial action in general has been known about for a number of weeks. However, he will also appreciate that for some individual doctors, the decision on whether or not to participate in industrial action will have come later than that. So boards have had to assess the impact on an ongoing basis and inform patients accordingly. I am satisfied through the updates that I have had that they have taken all appropriate steps to do that in order to minimise the impact on patients. But unfortunately, as I have made clear in previous answers, a number of patients too many patients will be affected by today's action, and that's why I can again give him the assurance that all appointments will be rescheduled as quickly as possible, again to minimise the disruption and the impact on patients, who should be the first priority of all of us.
Question number 6, Rob Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Deputy First Minister what progress has been made to reduce journey times on the main line from Inverness to Edinburgh and Glasgow. Deputy
First Minister.
Over the last 5 years, this Government has invested £1.9 billion in improving the infrastructure of our railways, including opening the Airdrie-Bathgate route, work on the Borders Rail and improvements to services between Dundee and Elgin. And, of course, the Transport Minister will have further announcements on the future of rail to make this afternoon. As part of this investment, we have made progress in reducing journey time between Inverness and Edinburgh and Glasgow by 35 minutes and increasing the number of services. In 2011, 2 additional trains were added to the service, making 11 in total, and recent network improvements between Perth and Inverness complete phase 1 of the project.
Rob Gibson.
I thank the Deputy First Minister for her answer. I declare an interest in using the service regularly. It would appear to be more punctual indeed, and the services have increased in numbers. But can the Deputy First Minister confirm that passengers to and from the north of Scotland will see further reductions in journey times by the end of this year?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, as I said, the Transport Minister will have further information about rail services in general to give this afternoon, so I don't want to incur the ire of the Presiding Officer by straying onto territory he will cover later on. But I am happy to confirm that a consultation on the new timetable was conducted in May, and the new timetable to be published in the autumn will see journey times reduced again this December. In addition, Network Rail is currently examining what infrastructure improvements are necessary to further reduce journey times on this route, and I hope that Rob Gibson, both as a user of the service and indeed as a local MSP, will welcome these developments.
That ends First Minister's questions. I now suspend until 2 p.m.